This is Rob, everybody.
Hi, thank you. Beautiful. How's everybody doing? It's good to see you. If you don't have an outline or a Bible, I highly recommend grabbing one. And it's great to see you. And a couple quick things before we jump in to the teaching. One thing. Last spring, Angela, who is our esteemed, beloved children's pastor, talked about how they were apparently you all take that verse about being fruitful and multiplying quite literally, because just more and more kids, I think spawning is the proper term. And so she talked next spring about some of their dreams of where they want to take this, and I think 250 of you jumped in new to the children's ministry and started serving in there, and that's a really beautiful thing. And they're now experiencing another kind of wave of growth, to the point where the past few weeks it's been pretty standard in several of the rooms that kids are just turned away. And so the parents load the minivan up, come here, go down the hall to put the kids in so they can come in here, and are just told, sorry, I don't have room. And which is not related to physical space, it's related to amount of workers. And so for us, that's a systemic problem we have here, is we ought to be able to take care of our own. So if that's something that maybe you've just been coming here a little bit and thinking, I want to get plugged into this place, that's a great way to meet a lot of people your own age and much younger. And so you can, right down the hall there at the children's area, you can get an application, and we would love to see you get plugged in there, because we need to take care of this need promptly and quickly. And then next week on the Jewish calendar is Yom Kippur. It's the Jewish New Year. And so next week we're going to explore, for thousands of years, what did Yom Kippur mean? And how did Jesus understand Yom Kippur? And what's it mean for us? So next week we're going to work through this. What does Jesus want to save us from? And then we're going to celebrate communion. And then the following week we're going to explore the passage where Jesus talks about the man who builds bigger barns. It's one of the only passages in the Bible. I think it's only one of two passages where Jesus talks about somebody who's done something so terrible that their life is taken from them. And the thing the guy does is he has too much stuff. And so we're going to talk about having too much stuff. And it won't be relevant to any of us. But so we're going to talk about the bigger barns passage. The following week, the one and only Kent Dobson is going to be here teaching. And Kent's going to take us through what it meant to have a meal with somebody in the first century. And how when you had a meal with somebody, it was a political and cultural statement. It was a statement about land. It was a statement about ownership. It was a statement about possession. It was a statement about who's in and who's out, who's unclean and who's clean. And there were a group of people called the Am Haaretz. They were considered unclean. And Jesus has meals with them, which was terribly, terribly offensive, because it carried such profound economic and political implications. He's going to walk us through that, and then we're going to celebrate communion again. And then the week following that is going to be Hate Sunday. And once again, there'll be no relevance for any of us. We're going to talk about how Jesus wants to save Christians from hate. And we're going to talk about anger and a lack of forgiveness, and how to begin to deal with that. So that's what we're headed to in the next couple of weeks. But today is all hell all the time. Today we're going to talk about hell. And it got unbelievably quiet in the 9 a.m. service. It was total crickets by the end of the message. It was just, so that told me, today we're going to explore hell and just ask the question, where do we find hell in the Bible? And then what does it mean? So we're just dealing with the word hell. We're not dealing with all sorts of other things. We're dealing with the word hell. And let me pray, and then we will jump into it. God, we live in this broken world where lots of people are hungry, lots of people are thirsty, where lots of people are unsafe, and many have no despair. God, we think of our brothers and sisters who are here today, who are hungry, thirsty, or have no hope, who are scared, who are weighed down with the weight of the world. And we are desperate. For some of us, we simply need guidance. For others of us, we need reassurance. For others of us, we need to be punched in the face. We need to be woken up. We're sleeping, and we don't want to live this way. And so we give ourselves to you. We acknowledge that this is holy, sacred ground, as all ground is sacred and holy. We acknowledge that you are good and kind and loving, and our only hope is to continually throw ourselves into you. And so as we work today through a series of passages, give us fresh eyes and hearts to see what Jesus is saying here. Help us to be free from all sorts of cultural baggage. Help us to just hear a fresh thing from you. And in Jesus' name, everybody said, Amen. Okay, this is going to be so much fun. I can't believe it. Jesus Wants to Save Christians, Part 3, a brief survey of hell. Now, the word hell does not occur in the Hebrew Scriptures. So in most of the Bible, the word hell, you simply can't find it. The word hell only occurs in the New Testament. And in the New Testament, it occurs just a few times, and I have typed out every single mention of it that I can find. And if you can find other verses that have it in books that you made up, that would be sweet. But I can't. Now, there are 3 words in Greek that get translated into English, hell. The first is the word tartaros, letter A. It only occurs once in the book of 2 Peter chapter 2. And if you're taking notes, the key phrase, it's a term from Greek mythology. It's a term from Greek mythology, and it refers to the punishment and discipline of angels. So it's got a lot to say to us. But it's a Greek term of mythology, and it only occurs once. And essentially, this writer, Peter, borrows a concept from the Greek writers and poets of his day and uses it, and it's only there once. The second is a word called Hades, as in it's hot as Hades in here. Hades is used 4 times in the book of Revelation. You see the references there. It's used once in the book of Acts, but that's a quote from the Old Testament, so you could just write in the Acts 2, the end of that little line there. He's right, that's a quote from the Old Testament. And then Jesus uses the word 4 times. Matthew 11, Luke 10, which are parallel passages, means it's the same passage on 2 different books. Matthew 16, which is the passage, the gates of Hades will not prevail. The gates of Hades were a real physical place called the gates of Hades. And then Luke 16, which is the rich man and Lazarus, which we will deal with in a couple of weeks. That's it for the word Hades. The word Hades is basically a Greek equivalent of a Hebrew word Sheol. So in the Hebrew Scriptures is a word that comes up again and again and again. It's called Sheol. It's translated, it means grave, depths, pit, abyss, death, sleep, and other feel-good words. In the Hebrew Scriptures, for the Jewish people for thousands of years, there simply was no coherent system of belief about the afterlife. The afterlife simply was not something that was talked about very much. The closest you get is the word called Sheol, which it sometimes means those who have fallen asleep, those who are dead, those who have gone to the grave, the abyss. The closest you can get to any sort of afterlife would be this word Sheol. It simply wasn't something they talked about. It was understood that you walk with God now, and then you just walk with God on into the future. So the idea of talking about the afterlife by the time of Jesus was essentially a brand new idea. It just wasn't something, and you can comb all of the ancient literature, and it just wasn't a coherent system of who goes here, who goes here. It just wasn't really much on the radar. It only developed in the several hundred years before Jesus when good Jews started being martyred. Imagine, you know this good woman who walks with God. She has a pure heart. She cares for the poor. She is, when you think of somebody who walks with God, you think of her. Imagine, at the time of the exile, if a foreign king comes and conquers your land, and the soldiers of that king take her into the middle of the town, and they gouge out her eyes, they cut off her arms, and they kill her in front of everybody, including her children. Well, wait. She walks with God. She does the right thing. And that's what you get for doing the right thing, is you get publicly executed. So what began to happen in the Jewish consciousness is, well, if that's the reward for doing the right thing, then there must be some way that God fixes that situation on the other side. Because this can't be it. Do the right thing and die like that. So what began to emerge is God must have some way after death to redeem her or to care for her in such a way that makes up for that horrible death she suffered. Does that make sense? Kind of. So, you only really find people talking about the afterlife when they started experiencing such horrible martyrdom that they had to have a way to explain it. And then you begin to see the emergence of an afterlife where God somehow takes this good woman who walked with God and somehow redeems and rescues and does something with her. So the idea of an afterlife by the time of Jesus was simply it just wasn't really talked about much. Now, with this in mind, you've seen Tartarus and you've seen Hades. Those are all the references there. A couple of them we'll study in detail in a couple of weeks. The third word that's used for hell is a word called Gehenna. Now, Gehenna was a reference to an actual place. Gehenna, Ge means valley, Henna means Hinnom. Gehenna was the valley of Hinnom. It's an actual physical place. Every other mention of the word hell in the Bible is this word Henna, Gehenna, and it's a reference to an actual physical place. Now let me show you a slide. Is that next? Here is a slide of Gehenna. It's on the south side of the city of Jerusalem. It's actually a valley, which raises the question, what did Gehenna mean? And as we've learned before, did anything historically go on in Gehenna that it would become the name for hell? Now, turn to 2 Kings chapter 23. Gehenna had a very real history, and that real history shaped the way people understood this valley that was just south of the city of Jerusalem. 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10. There's a king named Josiah, and he's come to power, and he's trying to kind of clean things out so that people can be true to the one true God. And it says in 2 Kings 23:10, he desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Now, Ben means son of. So originally it was called the valley of the son of Hinnom, and then over time it just became called the valley of Hinnom. He desecrated it so that no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire to Molech. Okay, Molech was a god who was very popular at this time, and Molech said, this god, if you really love me and want to be a faithful follower of Molech, then you need to take your firstborn child and sacrifice that child on fire as a way of showing Molech how much you love Molech. So the valley of Hinnom was a place of child sacrifice. Now, for a good Jew, this was not a place to take a picnic and throw a frisbee on a Sabbath afternoon, okay? This was a place that was, things had taken place there that were the exact opposite of everything God dreams for His people. So it's like the anti-place of God. Now, over time then, you didn't see too many condos being built in the Valley of Hinnom, Okay, because this place had this significance. This is a place where some of the most horrible things people can do to each other were done. So over time, they began to use it as the town dump. You'd go to the south side of Jerusalem, to the wall in the valley, and you'd toss your trash over the wall down below. There are some sources that say that the place just absolutely smelled, of course. Now, if you have a big pile of garbage and trash starting to build up, and you want to get that pile down smaller, what do you do to all that garbage? Exactly. Fire, fire, fire. And write it 3 times in your notes, please. Okay? So, over time, as it became more and more the city dump, it had a fire going, and the fire didn't go out because you'd keep setting fire to different parts of it to keep the thing contained. Now, in those days, they did not have dogs like we do, like Fifi and Thumper, who you put sweaters on at Christmas time. Dogs were like wild, crazy, like mangy, running everywhere kinds of dogs. And so dogs would be in the dump fighting over scraps of food and garbage. And when these dogs would fight, there would be that high-pitched sound when dogs make that like wanting to grab something sound. And when their teeth ran into each other, that would be called the gnashing of teeth. So Gehenna was the place where the fire does not go out and there's the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Are we tracking? A real physical place. A place where things that had once had value and worth were no longer useful and were tossed. And then there was this endless fire trying to get rid of the stench and there, of course, was the gnashing of teeth. So the word Gehenna was a real physical. In the city of Jerusalem, of course, Gehenna would have been like there, where the freeway is, or where the bowling alley. I mean, it's just been right there for a lot of people in the first, an actual physical place in space and time. Now, in your notes, letter C says Gehenna, 2 Kings. The word Gehenna is used once by James. You can see it there next to 2 Kings. Every other use of the word Gehenna comes from Jesus. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, you've seen Tartarus, you've seen Hades, and then Jesus, other than James, is the only one to use this word Gehenna. The book of Romans, no Tartarus, Hades, or Gehenna. 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, no hell. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, no use of Gehenna, Hades, or Tartarus. Hebrews, nope. 1 and 2 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus, no Gehenna, no Hades, no Tartarus. So let's look at what Jesus, because obviously you can see here, the dominant use of the word comes from Jesus. So I want to take you to every one of these passages, and then we're going to ask a few series of questions. Now once again, today we're just dealing with the word hell. You've seen the other 2 words that it comes from. Let's start in Matthew, and let's just ask the simple question, because as Christians, what Jesus said is pretty significant. So let's just say, what if we ask the question, what does Jesus actually say about hell? Now, first instance, Matthew 5, verse 22. Let's start in verse 21. Matthew 5:21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, raka, and raka is a Hebrew word, raka. It's the sound of clearing your throat right before you're going to spit on someone. So the word raka, and if you just want to either spit right there in your notes or write in spit, the word raka is contempt. It isn't just, I don't like what you did. It's, I don't like you. And it isn't just, I don't like you, but it's a term of contempt, like I wish you didn't even exist. It's when somebody spits on you. That isn't just that they're upset with you, they are doing something to the very core of what it means to be human. Does that make sense? It isn't just I'm upset, it's you are lower, you are you are less than human. So if anybody says raka, if anybody spits, anyone who says to a brother or sister raka is answerable to the Sanhedrin, and anyone who says you fool, which was an ultimate ancient word of contempt and derision, anybody who says fool, which means you're a worthless human being, will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna. Now, when he says this, they would immediately, well, wait, that's a real place, Gehenna. And it centers around essentially profound contempt for another human being. Now, next example, Matthew 5:29. Let's start in verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into Gehenna. Okay, so this deals with lust, and it only applies to a few men. Look, and blind men can lust. So I think the passage is metaphorical. I'm not sure. Now, next, let's turn to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. So the first passage deals with contempt and anger. The second passage deals with lust. Matthew chapter 10. And notice let's start in verse 5 just to get an idea. These 12, so it's Jesus' first disciples. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. So Matthew 5 is to his disciples. And then this passage we're about to look at, he's speaking to his disciples, his closest followers. Verse 26, he's talking about people who will persecute them or who will give them a hard time. So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid. And the word afraid there is a word phobia. So we get the word reverence or respect. So it's a fear, but it's a fear rooted in a proper sense of reverence and respect. Rather, be afraid, have reverence and respect of the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell, Gehenna. So there's this God, the one who has the power of life and death, the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. God has the power of life and death. Don't be afraid of religious people who have a problem with you. Don't be afraid of people who persecute you. Don't fear and respect and have reverence for them. Have fear and respect and reverence for the only one who has the power of life and death. He's saying to his disciples before he sends them out, when you go out and you live this way in the world, just make sure you fear the right things or fear the right people. Don't fear people. All they can do is kill you. Fear or have respect. Let yourself be guided by a fear and respect and reverence for the one who has the power of life and death. And then turn over to, that's Matthew, what is that? Oh, 10. Okay, next one, Matthew 18. No, this next one is unbelievable. You cannot flannel graph this one. It's unbelievable. Matthew chapter 18. At that time, the disciples, so once again, Jesus is talking to his followers. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child, whom he placed among them. And Jesus said, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes a humble place, becoming like this child, is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. So he says you don't get the kingdom of God unless you understand humility, what it means to be like wide-eyed and filled with wonder. If you remain cynical, skeptical, if you remain hard and then you're not going to get it. You have to essentially recover your innocence and your humility. Now, verse 6, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone, which was like a giant rock, were hung around their neck and they were drowned in the depths of the sea. He says, listen, there are some people who are experiencing a rebirth. They're meeting God for the first time. They're trusting in what Jesus says, and they're coming to believe that Jesus can actually be trusted. There are people who are alive spiritually in ways they've never been. If there is somebody, and he's talking to religious people, who comes along and gets in the way of this beautiful, pure thing that's happening in their life, if there is some sort of religious person who comes along and starts harassing them or inhibiting them or preventing them from continuing on this beautiful journey of transformation and this beautiful journey of rebirth, well, to that person who does that, it's better that they drowned in the depths of the sea than be allowed to keep getting in the way of the beautiful thing that's happening in this person's life. And then that's like the opening remarks. Then he cranks up here. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things are going to come. They must come. But woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of Gehenna. Whoa. Okay, we'll come back to that. Turn one more, and then we'll have our survey done. Matthew 23. Now, where you see, like in 3 and 4, how there's a Luke and a Mark, those are parallel passages. So it's the same. Jesus says essentially the same thing. It's just in a different place. And then Matthew 23. Jesus is talking to a group of religious leaders. And he talks to his crowd and he talks to his disciples. Then in verse 13, he switches gears and starts talking to the religious leaders. And I don't know if the wine was flowing or what, but he gets on a rant here. And it goes and goes. It is beautiful. But he has unbelievable words for the spiritual authority of the Jewish people at that time. Notice verse 13. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. He says you're supposed to be the spiritual leaders, and you actually get in the way of people who are honestly seeking God. You're supposed to be the ones helping people find God, but because the way that they are finding God doesn't fit with your system and rules, you actually are preventing people from coming to know God. Once again, there's no relevance for us today. We'll keep going. Verse 15, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel, and the Pharisees were the one group that were really into like proselytizing, traveling over trying to get converts. You hypocrites, you travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and then you make that convert twice as much a child of hell as you are. If you heard this guy, you'd be like, he's going to get killed. And these are actually the people who do end up killing him. So, and then verse 33, you snakes. Now, these are experts in the Scripture. Where is the first mention of a snake in the Bible? Yeah, going way back to a Thursday, I believe it was, in the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Okay, these are all the experts in the Scriptures. So they know their text. And he calls them snakes. Why does he use that word? Wait. A snake? Well, that's the tempter from the very... I mean, this is unbelievable what he's saying. You snakes, you brood of vipers. So, how will you escape being condemned to Gehenna? Ha! And then he picked up the check. So, Jesus, there you go. There you go. I just wanted you to see, you just saw every mention of Gehenna, hell, that Jesus used. Now, because this is what we're focusing in on today, let's ask a series of questions just based on what you saw. First, what are these hell passages about? I tried to go through and think of the five kind of groupings. Well, the first one's about anger and contempt. It's a passage about essentially wishing somebody wasn't alive. It's essentially a passage about pushing somebody else down. It's a passage about dehumanizing somebody. The second passage is about lust. And lust is whenever you treat somebody as an object, whenever you exploit somebody else for your own gain or pleasure. So lust is what happens when other people stop being humans in your eyes and start being objects. And in the process, obviously, you're doing something to your own humanity. But nevertheless, lust is when that person is no longer a fully integrated, mysterious person we call a human being, but they now are a that. They are something to be exploited or used for my own purposes, gain or pleasure. So lust is far wider than just a man or woman, man. Lust is what happens when people start becoming objects. The third passage deals with fear. It's fearing the wrong things or the wrong people. It says, don't fear people who just can kill your body. No. Don't have fear and respect for the wrong things. Fear and respect and have reverence for God. And then in everything else, be fearless. So don't get that backwards as you go out into the world. He's about to send them out. As you go out into the world, make sure that you have respect and fear for the right things. And then the fourth one is causing others to stumble. So it's dealing with what happens when somebody gets in the way of the journey of another. It's when somebody crushes the joy of somebody. It's when somebody hinders the beautiful thing that God is doing with all sorts of badgering questions or something that don't help. So these passages, and I'm sure you can maybe summarize them. And the last one is, woe to you, you hypocrites. It deals with hypocrisy. That the Sons of Hell passage is converting people to a religion that isn't what God had in mind. So it's converting people to something that isn't good and true and beautiful. So I'm sure maybe you have better language to it. But if I were to summarize kind of those five passages that we looked at, those seem to be the kind of the big ideas. Now, next, who is or isn't Jesus talking to in these passages? He is talking to his disciples. He's talking to his disciples. He's talking to religious people. He's talking to Jews. He's talking to religious leaders. He's talking to people who either want to follow him and are following him, or people who are supposed to be receptive to his message, but in fact are hypocrites. That's who he is. Who isn't he talking to? Well, he isn't talking to people who aren't saved or who don't believe. He isn't talking, even in this passage, to Gentiles. He isn't talking to heathens, pagans, and various and sundry other labels. He just isn't. He's talking to his followers, and he's talking to religious people and religious... Maybe we could answer the question with a question. If Jesus were here today, who would he be talking to? Because when he comes and speaks to these religious people. So maybe a better question would be, if Jesus were to come today, given what we know in this passage, who would he be talking to? Next, what is hell to Jesus? Well, in these passages, it's a present reality. It's a town dump. And it's the way people are living now. They're like living town dumps, in a way. It's a present reality, and it has future implications if you keep living this way. This is going some very, very scary place. Stop. Come back. Don't do that. I'm warning you. I'm warning you. It's a present reality, and it obviously has future implications. But first and foremost, Gehenna is a present reality. And then, so how does Jesus then use hell in his teachings? And as I was wrestling with what he's doing here, he's really warning Israel to be Israel. Now, as we've talked over the past months, these people were called to be the light of the world. These people were called to show the world what truth and compassion and grace and mercy and justice looks like. So these people were called to show the world what a kingdom of priests look like. These people were called to be a holy nation. These people were called to be a city on a hill that gives light to the world. And so these teachings, Jesus is warning these people, the ways that you're living do not show the world what God is like. Stop living that way so that you can be the people God made you to be. In the passages that we looked at, hell is a warning. Well, man, if you find yourself being consumed with this, man, better to chop off a hand than let that take over your whole body and you become not the light of the world. Now, can I go back to that list, to the 5-point list there? Oh, nice. Quick hand. It's easy to talk about where somebody else is going when they die. That's easy. It's easy to condemn that whole group because they don't believe like I do, so when they die, whoa, man, they're going to get it. That's easy. Let's talk about your anger. It's easy to talk about how I'm right and they're wrong, and when they die, extra crispy for them. Easy. Anybody can make grand judgments about the future destiny of a group of people they've never met. Anybody can do that. Let's talk about your anger and my anger. Let's talk about our own raka towards each other. Let's talk about how you really feel towards those relatives. Are we preaching? Because that brings hell to earth. You want to see hell on earth? Let's find some people who have contempt for each other. Let's talk about lust and what it does to how it objectifies the person, but then what it does to the heart of the person who's caught up in lust. Well, that's some hell on earth right there. That's not heaven. That's not heaven crashing into earth. That's something else crashing into earth. Hell, Gehenna, was a real place of destruction. And what does anger do? It destroys us. It destroys the people around us. How about fear and what it does to us when we fear the wrong things? When we have worry and anxiety over the wrong things? How many of you have found yourself laying awake at night, unable to sleep? And the hours tick by, and as you sort through, why can't I sleep? It's bills. It's people you're going to have to see. It's pressure to feed the family. It's all the stuff it's fear. It's fear. And it can consume us, and it makes us miserable. It's a sort of hell on earth. How can I be a light to the world when fear owns me? Are we tracking? How can I be grace and compassion to the world when I am consumed with lust? How can a person bring justice to those who are hurting when they have profound anger and contempt for the people they're supposed to be partnering with to bring justice and compassion to the world. Or, and the one where Jesus gives us a physical prop just to help us, causing others to stumble. Perhaps you have had a spiritual awakening. Maybe for the first time, you've decided to trust Jesus. Maybe you're studying the Scriptures for the first time and you're discovering what it means to live in the kingdom of God. Maybe for you, you all of a sudden no longer hate God in the Christian faith, but you actually are finding yourself enthralled with this God who's rescuing the world through Jesus. And you're growing and you're alive in ways you can't even explain. And some religious person comes in your path and starts saying, "You're what? You're going where?" That's the name of a planet, not a church. "What are you doing?" And they start firing away, and something within you gets broken and shattered. How many of you know exactly what I'm talking about? And Jesus says, the person who does that breaking and shattering, the person who shuts the kingdom of heaven in your face, woe to them. That's bringing some hell. Because heaven was starting to invade, and they brought some hell. Or hypocrisy. Simply being a split person and saying one thing and doing something else. Or whole institutions that say one thing. Or people who are split. And we don't even know who we are, and so we act this way, and we act this way, and we act... That's not heaven, that's hell. It's easy. It's so easy to say they're going to hell and they're not, and well, which is generally us. And anybody can do that. But asking hard questions about how you're actually living. And when Jesus uses hell, it's not an abstract idea about some other. It is hard, cold reality about you have been called to be the light of the world and a warning to all of the ways in which we get consumed with things that prevent us from being who God made us to be. Jesus wants to save Christians. There's a couple ways I think we could probably phrase this. Let's go to the very end, shall we? Oh, yeah, a couple questions. Then we'll do that. Man, a couple questions. Number one, when Jesus talks about hell, is it a final destination or a present destiny? When Jesus uses the word hell, he's calling these people into their present destiny. He's calling them to confront their own sin and their own shortcoming. He's calling them into the destiny God has for them here and now. Now, there are texts that deal with final destination. We'll get to those. We just want to look right now exactly at what Jesus said. Number two, our question I would simply ask, is your understanding of hell biblical or cultural? When you think about hell, is it based on the actual things Jesus said, or is it cultural ideas and concepts that you have accumulated along the way that actually are nowhere in the teachings of Jesus? Now, the word hell isn't in, other than what you see listed here, other passages in the Scripture. There are other things in other passages which we'll look at given enough time. Nevertheless, when we think about being a Christian and following Jesus and doing what Jesus says, are your understandings of hell directly linked to what Jesus actually said, or all sorts of other things that actually may even have absolutely no grounding whatsoever in the Bible? One final thought, that to me, Jesus wants to save Christians from making hell about them then instead of us now. Jesus wants us to save us from missing the point, from talking. And this was fascinating to me after the 9 a.m. service. We talk about anger, lust, hypocrisy, and people, okay, yeah. But when are you going to say that all those other people are going to hell? Yeah. Okay, how I live now, big deal. What about them then? Yeah. Okay, I guess my heart is kind of important, but I just want to know that all those other people I'm not going to have to spend eternity with. Are these values that anywhere Jesus affirms? Now, I think we ought to take hell literally. Like Sudan today. I think we ought to take hell literally. Poverty in Grand Rapids. I think we ought to take hell literally. Depression and suicide all around us. Loneliness is a form of hell on earth. Would you agree? Yeah, I'm all for taking hell. Let's take it literally now. And then we'll talk about what it means forever. But let's right now ask the question, where are the hells on earth, and how can we bring heaven there? Because that's what Jesus commands us to do. Let's pray. God, we've just begun this study, but we want to ground ourselves in what Jesus actually says. We know there's way more. We know there's way more difficulty to wrestle through. But God, please forgive us when we miss the point, when we make it about something that Jesus doesn't make it about. God, we acknowledge that our world is hurting. We acknowledge that our world is lost, and we acknowledge that many of us were lost. We're in bondage. Anger and lust consume us. We are simply crippled in our ability to be who you made us to be, and we need your help. We need you to rescue us. We need you to save us. God, for all of the ways that we fall short, we desperately cling to Jesus and the forgiveness through him. God, we want to be a light to the world. We want to be the kinds of people who help rescue this world through you. We thank you for the teachings of Jesus, for the wake-up they are to how we're living now. We ask you to save us and to continue to save all of us every day.